Hey everyone, Rick Albert here. Let's talk about equity. Let's get started. I'm going to give a presentation on what to do with your equity. Equity is the value in your property minus any sort of loans, right? So if you're valued at $1 million, you have a loan for $750,000, you have $250,000 worth of equity to play with. Let's talk about your options. So let's go ahead and get started. So anyone who's watching this, the majority of you know who I am. My name is Rick Albert. I'm a house hacker here in Los Angeles, as well as now an out-of-state investor. I'm super excited. I have rentals. Some are on the market, some are rented out. So it's quite an experience. I'm very excited about it. Of course, I'm also a local realtor and broker associate with American Real Estate, where we have a major focus on investments. So let's go ahead and get started. So as an obvious disclaimer, I'm not a financial or tax advisor. It's recommended to talk to one. We all know that real estate is a form of investments that can result in gains or losses, and past results don't necessarily guarantee future results. But let's go right into it. So why overall do we invest in real estate? Sometimes, especially with the eviction moratoriums and things like that, people start to second guess, why are they doing this? Well, there's 4 ways to make money in real estate. First is through cash flow. It's after all your expenses are paid and you're bringing in a couple $100 a door, that's cash flow. Next is appreciation. You buy a property today for $500,000. In a few years, it might be worth $525,000, $550,000. Over time, it builds. You also have loan buydown. This is something that not everybody talks about. So every time you make a mortgage statement, part of that mortgage statement, part of that bill is principal and part of it's interest. Well, the principal portion is buying it down, which means you're building equity that way. And what's great about it is if you have rentals, the tenants are doing that for you. That's why leveraging is so important in real estate and why even some of the biggest players in real estate have mortgages. And of course, there are tax benefits. There's cost segregation, there's different ways to write things, run off your mortgage, and all sorts of different advantages from a tax perspective to invest. So let's take a basic example. Over 30 years at a 3% appreciation, your value actually would double. So if you have $1 million asset today, 30 years from now, you now have a $2 million asset. But at the same time, we have that loan buy down. So if you have a loan amount of $750,000 over the same 30 years, you go down to 0. Everything in between is equity. Alternatively, another way to look at it is, let's say if you didn't own, you'd be renting right now. So that value could be equivalent to rent. So let's say $3,000 a month over 30 years, you're now paying $6,000 a month, but there's nothing at the bottom, right? Because you didn't pay anything off. You've just been throwing money away. And so that's why it's so important to invest in real estate, whether it's your personal residence or an investment property. Now, many people are talking about, is there a crash happening? The short answer is unlikely. If you take a look at this is from MBS Highway as of today on February 16th. They take data from the Federal Reserve, National Association of Realtors, current unemployment rates, current building trends, and they kind of give predictions. So they can see that over the last 5, 10, and 63 years, you can see what the average appreciations have been. But even in the future for LA County, they're still showing growth. Has it slowed down? Absolutely. These higher interest rates have thrown a lot of people in a loop. Why? Because there were potential buyers that had not been priced out, not because the home was selling for $500,000 or $1 million, but because the interest rates have doubled or tripled over the last couple of years. But the reality is we can't focus on that. We can only focus on what we have control over. So we have to keep moving forward. And so this is why this particular information is super important. It's not necessarily saying that we're going to see this crash that buyers are hoping for. As a matter of fact, my last few listings have all gotten multiple offers over asking. So clearly the buyers are out there in a strong way and inventory is still low. So the reality is you have this equity, right? You have value, but it's dying, and it's dying due to inflation. Right? Yes, you might have equity of $200,000, but we all know with inflation going up, that dollar is becoming weaker and weaker. So having it just sit there isn't doing you any favors. So really, your equity can do better. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So let's start with the return on equity, which is the secret to building wealth. And I shouldn't say it's so much of a secret anymore because it's becoming more and more prevalent in forums, in the real estate world. It's actually becoming more important than cash on cash return. So the idea is return on equity takes into account your overall return on an investment, given the amount of equity you have in a property. Basic premise with your current equity, is there a better use of that money, right? The money's just sitting there. Does it make sense to let it sit, or do you have it work for you? One calculation that you can use is net cash flow plus loan buy down, because that's still equity you're building, divided by the current value minus the cost to sell. So what are your options? You can stay the course, you can keep it, but pull out a home equity line of credit, known as a HELOC or a cash out refinance, or you sell it. All three are great options. It all depends on the circumstance. So when should you not sell, right? Yes, I'm a realtor, but there's many times I've told clients, don't sell, keep the property. Here's some reasons why. One, if you have low equity. If you don't have enough money to play with, why do anything with it? Second, you're content with your lifestyle. The bills are getting paid, you're bringing enough cash flow to pay your own bills. You don't want to deal with the hassle of selling or getting a mortgage, whatever. That's okay, right? Everybody has different points in their life. If you invest here in Los Angeles, LA has a low vacancy, which means high appreciation, right? So I have a client, very long time client. He had a 2-bedroom ADU on the market. He was getting between 100 to 200 calls a day, a friggin' day. He had to raise the rent by $100 a month to slow it down. That's how much activity he's getting. And other investors are having similar experiences. Something else to keep in mind is your personal age. You know, for those that are, I'll consider myself younger, the millennials, Gen Zers, whatever, we have the ability to, we have that time, we have that 30 years, but if you're older, you care more about cash flow, you're heading towards retirement. So talk to people who are retired, it's actually very expensive. It's very expensive to be retired because you have medical expenses, but also you're bored, right? We spend 40+ hours a week working. I'm not spending money right now giving this presentation, but if you're retired, what are you gonna do, right? You're gonna travel, you're gonna take classes, whatever. So you might need that high cash flow, and reinvesting that money into something that's lower cash flow may not make sense for you. You might wanna recoup some minor losses. So for example, if you had to do some major repairs and you're like, look, I don't wanna sell it yet, I wanna get some more cash flow, recoup my losses, and then I'll sell, it's not a bad idea. Generally speaking, especially in the single family and condo space, buyers aren't paying a big premium for a brand new AC unit, a brand new roof. They're already expecting an AC to be working. They're already expecting the roof to be working. Also, it might make more sense to take out a HELOC or a cash out refinance, right? Keep the asset you have and then go reinvest the money. That's how you buy with zero down. So here's an example. You have a property worth $1 million, you have $750,000 in equity. Keep in mind, in Los Angeles, this is a very real thing. It is totally possible for people to have this kind of equity. Property is in good condition, has owned it for a long time, tenants are performing well, property owner is 70 years old, right? So knowing all this information, it's like, okay, the person's on the older side of things, so they might just need the money. They might just need the high cash flow. Property's in good condition. They don't anticipate any major repairs going forward. It might make sense to keep it. So in this case, they take out a HELOC for 70% of the equity, which would be the difference of $525,000. They go buy another property out of state, maybe it's a condo, whatever. And now they have this great cash flowing property. And now they have a second one to kind of give them some extra income. Now, some things to think about if you're doing a cash out or a home equity line of credit. So HELOCs are generally higher interest rates, but typically don't have points. What's also great about them is you only pay on the money you use. This is super important because when you do a cash out refinance, once the money's out, you start paying interest, you start making payments whether you've acquired another property or not. Another type of really popular loan program is called the debt service coverage ratio, DSCR. These loans are also generally more expensive than a conventional loan, but there's way less paperwork because the loan is based on the performance of the future rental, not your own income, right? So if you don't have a lot of income, but you have the cash, this is one way to accomplish this. For conventional financing, depending on how big your portfolio is, a lot of lenders don't really like to do more than 10 loans for one individual. So if you have 10 properties, DSCR is the exception, you probably would have to go that route. And of course, some lenders may require the property to be in an LLC. So keep that in mind, because in the state of California, if your property isn't normally subject to statewide rent control, once it becomes an LLC, it will be. So it's something to think about. Now, something else to consider is if you have a tenant that's not paying rent, you're probably thinking, why would I do a cash out refinance when I already have a non-paying tenant? Well, do the cash out, go buy an investment property to help offset some of that cost, right? Because you're obviously going to buy a property that's going to cover that new mortgage, but then if you get some extra cash flow coming in, it can kind of help and offset some of those losses until you deal with the tenant in hand. So now let's talk about, why should you sell? Well, it has very low cash flow. That's possible in the condo market, things like that. If you have high equity, if you have a ton of cash, right? When you take out a mortgage, they usually only do 70% loan to value. There are lenders that might do higher, but with selling, you get 96% or 94%, depending on closing costs, commissions, things like that. So you actually get more money coming in. And if you do what's called 1031 exchange, you can defer those taxes. You might have HOA or condo concerns. So have there been a lot of leaks in the complex? Are there special assessments coming? Anything that might give you some reason to bail, this is a good reason, because those are things you don't have control over. Property needs repair, systems are older. Let that be someone else's problem, right? And buyers will do that. And sometimes you can negotiate how much you give them. So if it costs 30 grand to replace a roof, maybe you guys negotiate at 15. Well, now you just save $15,000, which means more money in your pocket. Rent stabilization ordinance, rent control. That's not for everybody here in Los Angeles. Things like, how much can I raise rents? What kind of paperwork do I need? What kind of fees do I have? There are markets that don't have those complexities, and it might make more sense for you to allocate your money elsewhere and let that be somebody else's problem or business strategy. Of course, if you have vacancies is also a big reason to sell. Why? Because you have a bigger pool of buyers now. If it's a duplex, maybe it's owner occupied, they want to house hack it. If it's a house, now it's just a family that may want to buy it, and they're going to pay more than what an investor will pay. Now, if you have it on the market as a rental and it just hasn't moved, if you've been just stuck on the market for a long time, maybe it's a sign that you should be selling instead, right? You're not going to get the rents you want or need. It's time to move on. If you want to recoup your losses, so if you've had some major losses, for example, a non-paying tenant that you finally got out, you may not be recouping those tens of thousands of dollars that you are hoping to have. Now, also, if you lived in it 2 of the last 5 years. So if you lived in a property 2 of the last 5 years as your primary residence, if you are single, the first $250,000 is tax-free. If you're married, it's the first $500,000. So here, you actually don't even have to do a 1031 exchange. You can just pocket the money and do what you want with it. I have a client, we just sold his house. He had been renting it out for a minute, but because of this clause, him and his wife collected about $500,000 in tax-free money. They put it in a high-interest savings account until they decide what kind of properties they want to buy. So in the meantime, they're going to make about 20 grand a year with these higher high interest rate savings accounts. So they don't feel that pressure, and you can have that same benefit. So here's an example. Your property's worth $1 million, so you would net 500,000 from the sale, right? And again, this is totally possible. If you bought as distressed property in the early 2010s, this is totally realistic. But this gives you the ability to buy a $2 million property. So using that same kind of chart and graph we looked at before, you have a $2 million asset now, right? Originally it was $1 million. Now you just doubled your equity position in the same amount of time. You also have a bigger loan amount, which means higher payments, which you're now kind of like freaking out about, but your tenants are paying that. That means you're building wealth faster. And that's why this is such an important exercise to do with all of your investment properties and even your own personal residence, because maybe it's a mix. Maybe it's sell your personal residence, keep part of that money to go buy a new personal residence, and use the difference to go buy an investment property, right? You can make it work. So things to think about when selling. So your property value is based on generally 3 different factors, or 3 different ways. First is sales in the area. So my neighbor's house is identical to mine. That sold for $750,000. Now my house is worth $750,000. It's that simple. Next one, rents to capitalization rate, also known as cap rate. So, hey, my net amount of money that I bring in is $10,000, 5% cap rate is $500,000 sales price or valuation. Every property is different. LA, the cap rates tend to be a little bit less versus like the Alabamas of the world, where it might be literally double. And also, what is the buyer inheriting? This is very common in a conversation I'm having with a lot of landlords. If you have a tenant that's not paying, that's a problem. And that means you're not going to get full resale price for your property. If you want to sell, you want someone else to inherit that problem. So that's where the prices start to fluctuate. What is a buyer inheriting? A lot of investors like to buy problems. I bought a property in Alabama. It wasn't financeable because it needed about $50,000 worth of work. Well, because of that, I actually got it for half the price it was listed for, just got the appraisal in, and it appraised for about 40-ish grand more than all the money I put into it. So I'm already ahead of the game, but I inherited that problem. It took 4 months. Now it's about to be posted for rent. Now, realtors, who you work with matters. So you get what you pay for. The discount brokers must cut corners somewhere, right? Cell phones, lock boxes are not going to do showings, that sort of deal. So you need to make that decision if that makes the most sense for you. The market is become a little bit wonky. So this isn't a few years ago where you could put one photo up and the home would sell. Now, the second part is always ask open-ended questions. So by doing that, you're forcing the realtor to think, you're forcing them to not be a yes person. So what are you going to do to get the word out? What are you going to do to prevent another round of negotiations? Or give me an example when. Give me an example when you took over a listing from a discount broker. I've done that. We sold it for 25 grand more than it was listed for before. What you shouldn't do is ask closed-ended questions, yes or no questions. So are you going to take professional photos? Yes. Are you going to do open houses? Yes. Right? The realtor is going to tell you what you want to hear to get the listing. For those who are following my YouTube channel, you know that I have done a series where I had to make the decision of, do I sell or rent out my condo? And it was a difficult decision, but it's my full thought process. I looked at active rents, I looked at what I could sell it for, and then I made an ultimate decision. That, in a nutshell, is how I handle equity and how you should too. Because everyone here watching this wants to build some level of wealth, right? We don't know what's going to happen in 30 years. The reality is, if you're a millennial, you're already halfway through your working years, right? If our goal is to retire in our 60s, now we're in our 30s. So these are the types of decisions we have to make today, things we have to do right now. I'd love to get your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. Comment below. Don't forget to follow or subscribe depending on where you're watching this. And you have an amazing day.